So you clicked on a video that said the hot and the cold of FLOE, and you're probably thinking, oh, someone's going to like it, someone's not going to like it. Well, I don't want to burst your bubble, but we are going to talk about our experiences with FLOE thus far. We've played it 2 times. We were going to do a just played, but we decided we had 2 significantly different experiences.
We did.
Some of which has to do with the game, some of which, like all games, had to do with the situation, the time of night, the people at the table,
some spoilers, player count. Some of it was good, and some of it was not so good.
Yes.
So we'll go through kind of both and how we felt now at the end of 2 plays.
Yeah, so what we're not going to do is explain the game thoroughly. If you want that, please come back and watch this. But there are plenty of other videos out there, Thinker, Themer, all sorts of people have videos that go into the details of what you're doing. John Gets Games has a very thorough playthrough where he teaches and gives a tutorial of the game. So take a look at those. But if you want to hear some of our thoughts on this, we're going to do that and probably talk a little bit about some of what the game's doing in those terms.
Sure. So let's start with our first play, though. We started with a 4-person game, which is the max player count for this, and we had learned the game, we knew the game.
We had learned the game.
Yeah. we knew what we were doing, but there's a lot going on, which I will say with a caveat. The copy we have is a prototype, and they gave us a copy where this is going to be something where different elements of it get introduced over different plays. We're in like the 3rd play where like we have a bunch of different things going on. So there's a bunch of stuff that you can interact with, different encounters, different things going on in the caves. We had it all in one in our first one. And with 4 people, it was a lot.
It was a lot. I would say, not to disagree completely, but I would say that had we had one experience under our belt, we would probably have wanted to jump to having all of that anyway.
Sure.
In fact, when we played again today, just the 2 of us, we still included all those things, and it felt like a different experience. Part of that was having the experience under our belt and the knowledge of what the game is doing, how it's doing it, and there are some different balances going on between 2 and 4 players with the game in its current state, and if you check their campaign, and I think Thinker Themer mentioned this too, they're already continuing to tweak and develop the game such that player count issues that come up regarding how many resources are out there, what all you can get done, to give those experiences a little bit more parity between 2 players and 4 players. But spoiler alert, 2 players felt a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more on pace with what I think we'd want this game to be. 4 players felt less so, for sure. We hit a point early on where we're like, whoa. And again, some of this comes with the experience of having played it, but there was fewer resources out there.
Yes, it was punishing.
Yeah.
It was like, dang, you just took that thing, but I wanted the thing, and now there's nowhere else to go get it.
Where can I get that thing?
How am I going to do all the stuff I want to do? It felt like every action I was like really fighting to try to get what I wanted to. But also, I think what's interesting about this game is that it's an exploration game, really, at its heart, right? We're exploring, we're going out and getting things, we're getting to level up our character, level up the different items we have, but it is competitive.
Yes.
And so knowing that it's a competitive game, we were kind of looking there and being like, okay, competitive, what am I trying to do? Trying to get to 6 points. You get to 6 points, you win. How do I get my points? But most of this game, you are not getting points.
Right.
Or if anything, you're getting half points, which are a little statue, but they're not very much on that track.
Yeah, it is an interesting mechanism. They start, most games, it's like you're scoring points. Well, in this game, for the most part of the game,
the
only
grand majority of it,
points you'll be scoring for a good while are indeed half points. And they actually have a cute little mechanism on your board along with a couple others where like, oh, I got a half point, you tick this thing up, and then if you get another half point, you tick it down and give yourself a point. But again, even that is going to be slow going because half points even aren't all over the place.
No, you really have to work towards them. And usually it's multiple turns working up towards even just a half point.
Yeah, so having some experience, knowing where those half points are can help that. But even in our play today, while Emily did some things, I don't know that you were doing them to get those half points, but she got up to like 4 points and I was at 2 at a certain point.
Yes.
But that's after having gotten some of the points. And then the game kind of accelerates very quickly at the end and wraps up. Now, this is not going to be unlike an experience like Dune Imperium, although I think Dune Imperium does sort of dangle the points, or rather the point points, more throughout the game. You can very early in a game of Dune, And again, I bring up Dune mainly because of the point scoring system.
Because Dune only plays to 10 points, and it's very it's a small amount of points. This game is similar in that you're only going to 6 points. Our end scores in this final game were 12.5 and 11.5.
And last night, I think many of us were south of 6.
Yes.
And someone who won, or maybe you and
12 or
were
13.
both over. Yeah. So I bring up Dune because there are some points dangled there that this doesn't. So especially in a 4-player game, it's just a lot longer to get around the table. You're waiting for your turn a little bit. I still wouldn't say after having some experience, a 4-player game isn't going to be like, oh my gosh, when's my next turn?
Right.
It is always going to feel that way compared to a 2-player game. And in our 2-player experience, to contrast everything that we've just said, it was a far more delightful and fun experience. And I think that is one of the core things this game is trying to do. This is a game, if you've ever played Tidal Blades, while a very different game mechanically, Tidal Blades is a worker placement game, but it has some interesting things you can do, like, you can go and fight monsters, which you typically can't do in a worker placement. This has a cave that you can explore and fight monsters. It has this area out here where you can explore along these sort of like ice formations and in the water with your familiars. And then a lot of times you're going back to the village to sort of interact with these village locations to get warmth back, which is a really fun and interesting mechanic because when you're out here, you get cold, so you're losing warmth.
Yeah.
And the warmth is effectively the amount of time you can spend out here, or in other words, the number of actions and things that you can do out here, kind of, sort of.
I'm not usually a big person for exploration games too, but I like, it feels very thematic, where you're like going out and you're like actually sailing the sea to these new parts. They flip over, you get to see new things, there are new resources there, and then like everything you're doing, I'm building out houses, I'm building out items, like everything I'm doing felt like my little route little explorer was really getting more and more powerful to the point where I was like, this is super cool. I'm actually doing more things. But it is a slow build, right? It is like you're building it over time, and it's not something where like the first round you're getting to do a million things. You're really building up till at the end you're like, and then I do that, and then I do this, and then I do this.
Right. That little combo thing, you start to see those from a distance more, having played the game once. I didn't see those in our first play.
Yeah.
But today when we played, I saw those coming, and I saw all the pieces and parts moving. I also recognized some things about the game that some preconceived notions that I had when we first played didn't allow me to see. And that is this village action here where you go up and do this. And oftentimes, like I said, you have to go back to the village if you don't have any warmth left to do this. But I didn't really recognize the village as a place to progress very much.
To do cool stuff, right?
But you can, and obviously, actually now that I've played it twice, I'm like, I feel dumb. It is clearly where you can do a lot of those things. It's actually where you make a lot of progress on your board with these resources. And you're moving these flow stones up to the top so that you can get those flow stones off to score points. And I had some of my most exciting turns or rounds, like maybe 2 or 3 turns in a row, where I just stayed in the village and I was like, oh, you know what? I'm able to do this and bump this flowstone up again and do this. And by the time, I think it was 2 turns I spent up here doing a few things, I had done so much. I had 3 buildings, I had some stuff, I had my warmth all back, I had some items to go out and fight. So I felt like incredibly powerful and ready to go back out into the cold and do more stuff.
Yes. Yeah, and that's really thematic, right? You literally were like, I'm a warrior, I'm ready to go, get me to the caves, and I'm going to go hit something. But I think what's really cool, too, is that these goalposts, right, are moving. So, like, every time that you're trying to level something up, it's harder and harder each time, which was very cool. And also you have the familiars. And I think that what balances it is that when you're in the town, your familiar gets to take an extra action. And so they can either get a bunch of cool stuff, depending on what you've built, or they can allow you to literally go to a second place.
Right.
So you're literally like taking 2 turns at once, and that feels huge, right? Like, they're pretty helpful when you're exploring, but when you're in town, it really feels like you're getting like a double action.
Well, yeah, and now, again, in this, I'm beating this dead horse. With some experience, I recognize now that when you go back to the village, I feel that the way they've built these buildings out and how they work mechanically, it really encourages you, borderline forces you to spend 2 turns here. because you're at least going to do the thing and run the familiar that lets you go to another thing.
Yeah.
So you're effectively able to use 2 locations. Like, no one's ever coming back to the village to just use 1 location. Now, with that said, if you go out here and get yourself in trouble, you'll have to, and you literally will be forced to come back to the healer and just get warmth back. But I don't think that happened. Most people aren't going to let that happen.
Yeah, it didn't happen in either of our games. But I think what's also nice about it is that, like, for combat, we're not really usually very combat focused. But in this combat, it's not as punishing either, because when you do go down below your health, you'll go to that healer and you will heal up right away. So, like, you both get to make progress if you didn't defeat the boss, and also even if you got killed, not really killed, but you're going to go back to the healer.
Yeah.
And so it's just not as punishing as you think it would be.
And I would say, you know, if you're a Euro player, I think there's a lot of cool mechanics going on here that's just a lot of satisfying things. Like we said, building out the buildings, moving up these tracks, having items that are going to help you, and I mean really help you mitigate the combat and the dice rolling. I had some items here that effectively made me like feel, well, I can go out there and take about anything on, not to mention collecting potions that are going to let you do that. So you can kind of go into the cave and have prepared to do so and do really well and feel like there was nothing that was going to kill me. But it also gives those crazy people out there, like I am at times, the chance to go in there, you know what? I don't have what I need, but I'm going to go in anyway.
Let's go dice.
You might, exactly. Let's go dice. You might roll the dice and get you on. It just brings some excitement to the game. And there's also a lot of more content for the game that they're planning that we didn't even have.
That's true. I also think what's interesting is that when we played at 2, something that I didn't feel as much at 4 was like, I didn't even really have to go to the caves as much. Or like
you just went like a couple times, right?
Yeah, you didn't do much of the exploring as much as I did. So like we were really going down different paths at the lower player count, and I'm hoping that with the higher player count, they can adjust it in a way so it feels that way too. Whereas like when we were in the higher player count, I felt like there were times where it felt like I was forced to go and fight monsters because monsters gave the best things. Or there were times where I was forced to like go explore right now before everybody takes all the good stuff. And I want it to feel more like choose your own path, choose your own destiny, and we can each get it there in different ways, because I like games where I can do the things I like and not always have to go to the things that I don't like.
That's true. And while I wouldn't say this is point salad, I would say on our second play, we did experience different routes. I think Emily, neither of us were scoring many points at the very beginning. And I very quickly saw, oh, I'm going to get my flow stones up to the top. I think all of them. And I'm going to get all of my flow stones out onto the board, which I did. You didn't get one of them.
I didn't get one of them. And one of them I just got on my last turn.
Right.
And so I just got it because I got the one map piece I needed.
But all the time I was spending going ahead and saying, okay, well, I'm going to do that. I'm going to commit. I was committed to getting resources. I committed to going back to the village, getting those things up there. While she was doing all that exploring and grabbing a half point here and a half point there. And before I knew it, I was like, well, wait a minute. Like, I was feeling really good about my game, but then she was, I think there was a time where you were up 4-2, maybe even 5-2. And I was like, well, she's going to end it here pretty soon.
And then you were like, point.
I had to run out there and get my flow stones out there. I did still lose, what was it? 12.5 to 11.5?
Yeah, it was quite close.
Yeah, there's some end game scoring, so there's a lot of that sort of secret agendas that you can score at the end of the game. We both maxed those out, but that is even a fun mechanic because you can kind of go back to that well and get, you can only have 4 of those cards, but you can keep going back and like curating those 4 cards such that you're like, okay, well, I'm going to score nearly everything I've got going on here. Yeah.
I will say overall, after our first game, it felt a little bit like, I don't really know. I think I might be able to pass on this one, right? Like, it's got some potential.
And she was the most positive.
I was probably the optimistic one at the table.
Honestly, she was like, let's play it again today, just you and me, before we record a video. And I'm so glad we did, because I think it's a game in development, like we said, but I think we definitely found the fun, and I think that's an important thing to give games. You know, sometimes it's about the experience. I would chalk this mostly up to that.
Yeah.
And not the game itself. So the hot and the cold of it, a lot more hot than cold. But I think given the game in its current state, it's probably going to be a little colder at 4 players than it is at 2.
Yes, yes. But I also think what's warming me up even more is knowing that
I like the theme that you keep going with.
There's more stuff that we're unlocking through the campaign,
yeah.
and there's more stuff coming out, right? Like there's even more going to be going on in the game that over multiple plays would come out, which is like piquing my interest as well of like, what more would they add to it? What more?
Yeah, we did get a look. I don't think we're supposed to say anything. They might have revealed some of this on the campaign, but they did have a little envelope in our box that had some loose components that we were just kind of like, I wonder what this is. It's another one of those or this. So there is some stuff that promises if you like the game that you want to continue and like, now maybe there's some new stuff.
It's not just going to be the same game every single time.
Yeah, you might encounter some new stuff. I'm just going to leave it at that as you play the game. But anyway, that was our hot and cold experience of playing FLOE. If you have any questions at all, please make them in the comments below. We will be completely happy to get down there and answer whatever you have. Until next time, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.